Hi and welcome to this week's 10x Leadership video. Thank you very much for tuning in. We're going to carry on the Modern Leadership series, and this episode is number 38, episode 38, Leveraging Technology. And then what I'm going to focus on is Agile. So just a quick reminder of how we got to here. So in episode 35, I started a series called Modern Leadership, and basically there are three elements to that. So there's adaptability, leveraging technology, and inclusivity. And this was all about how do we as leaders lead in an ever changing environment, and in fact a rapidly changing environment. And those are the three sort of themes that we need to be aware of and be able to, the sort of environment we need to work within. So we covered off adaptability in episode 31 with the growth mindset video, in episode 36 with adaptability and resilience, and then the last video was episode 37, which is about a future-oriented vision. And all of those videos will really help if you haven't already seen them to understand what's going on. So it's worth having a look at those if you haven't already. This week, though, we're going to cover off leveraging technology, and I get to use one of my favourite photos. So that photo there on the left-hand side, that's the face most people pull when we talk about leveraging technology. And the reason it makes me smile is because lots of people feel like that. They think technology is difficult to understand. And if you're going to be a coder, or you're going to be a real deep expert in technology, then yeah, of course it is. It can be really complex. But that's not what we're about here. We're about understanding from a business perspective, as a leader, what is it you need to know about technology. And there are a couple of things that I think are relevant. So one is about technology awareness in itself. And there'll be a few videos about this. So, I've put lots of lovely acronyms there. So AI, artificial intelligence, ML, machine learning, LLM, large language models, apps, things like Office 365, lots of other tools out there, and Agile. And I thought I would start off with Agile, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The other element to this leveraging technology, though, is about systems thinking. And I'll talk about that in a future video as well. And like everything on this channel, it's about pulling all of those elements together and understanding how they all fit together to deliver an effect. And the effect is you being a great leader. So what I'm going to talk about in this week, I was going to say to ease us into it. But to be honest, whether it's Agile or one of the other technologies, we're not going to go into the deep technical knowledge about it. We're going to go into the bits that are relevant to you as a leader. So all of this is going to be okay. And if you're pulling the face that you can see on the left-hand side there, hopefully you won't be in sort of 5-10 minutes time. So let's have a look at Agile. And I thought the best way of looking at Agile was actually to compare it with Waterfall. And these, Agile is a project management methodology, as is Waterfall. And most things that we do have some sort of project management leaning towards them. So this isn't about technology in itself. There are technologies that you can use, things like Jira and other, technologies that will help you lead in an agile way. But this is about a methodology, but it's really important because more and more of the world is leading or expecting projects to be led in an agile way. And if you don't know what agile is, you're going to miss out. Not only can you not do it, but also the opportunities for doing waterfall type projects are probably reducing at the moment. And I think there's some reasons for that, and I'll explain those as we go through. So let's have a look to see what Waterfall is. So Waterfall really is a traditional way of leading projects, or delivering projects is probably a better way of describing it. And there are some characteristics to waterfall projects, and they tend to be linear and sequential. I.e. you go through a series of steps and you follow those one after the other, and you don't move on to the next one until you finish the first one. So you work out what the requirements are for a product or a service, and you might spend absolutely ages working out what that is before you then work up a plan to determine how to deliver that. But you don't move on to the second stage or subsequent stages until you've worked out the previous step. So that's why it's linear and sequential. It normally has a clear set of requirements. What is it that is needed? Well, that is usually established through a series of discussions or conversations or surveys or a whole range of other things that help identify what you think your customer for this service or product wants. And as I've suggested already, that can be quite time consuming. And one of the other problems with it is that sometimes the customer doesn't know what they want. Or if they do know what they want, by the time you've captured all that information, things might have moved on, which is one of the downfalls of a waterfall type approach. The thing about it as well, though, is it does give you very predictable milestones. So, if ever you've used MS Project, you create all the steps aggregated up to, an activity that has how much effort's involved in delivering this thing. And then that gives you the overall project plan, and that project plan is what's used to measure success, really. How far through the project plan were you expected to be by now? How far through the project are you? Is that a good or a bad thing? So there are some very predictable milestones because, there's a very detailed plan usually that tells you what you can expect when. And, organisations who like some control, like this sort of project management, because you know what you're getting. Is it best for the customer? Is it best for products? Is it best for the current environment? Some of that, people who deliver waterfall projects don't really care about. What they want to do is have repeatable, really a predictable plan that everyone's signed up to, that everyone knows what they're getting, and therefore everyone's happy. Or are they? One of the problems with waterfall projects, as you've probably picked up from what I've saying already, is given it's sequential, given it's got requirements, given it's got predictable milestones, what it's not very good is it's not very good at being flexible. So it's great if you want to follow the steps, you want to follow them in order, but if you need to do something that's a little bit different, or you don't know what the requirements are, there's not a lot of flexibility with it. It's quite a rigid methodology. And again, as I've already said, there's quite a heavy focus on planning. And I've been in project teams, I've been leading projects where at times I've spent at least as much and sometimes more time explaining where I am in terms of the plan to others that are managing the project than I have delivering the project itself. I was in a transformation project probably about, 5-10 years ago, and that was certainly the case. I spent more time in planning meetings and I can't remember what we call them, sort of collaboration meetings where other project leads were getting together to talk about their plans than we were getting on with the project itself. So there's a lot of effort in creating and maintaining and reporting against the plan, all of which can eat into the time you've got to deliver. And the other thing about projects that use a waterfall methodology is that often the client or the customer or the end user are distant from the project itself. So it's almost done to them, because right at the start, somebody's gone off and worked out what their requirements were and created key user requirements and a whole load of other things. Moscow, so must have, could have, should have requirements, and ranked them and listed them and managed them to death. And once you've got that from a customer, you don't need to work with them anymore in a waterfall method, or at least that's the thinking, because you're just going to get on with delivering that then, however long it takes. So quite often the customer or client are not really involved once you've gone to the delivery phase of a project. So that's a waterfall approach. And, as I say, that was a traditional way of delivering projects. And there are lots of merits in it, and it's done us well over the years. But the thing is, and I've said this a few times in other videos, with the world spinning and moving on so rapidly, and if you think about the reason for these videos, it's about modern leadership and dealing with the world that's constantly changing. This methodology isn't particularly good at dealing with flexibility and a world that is constantly changing. So if you stick to a waterfall methodology and that's all you know, I believe you're going to get more and more out of date, and that will be less and less likely to be the project methodology used for activities going forwards. Not least as more and more things become digital, because the alternative method, the Agile methodology, was it was based on software development, and basically has morphed into project management principles for all sorts of complex projects. So that's waterfall. Let's have a look at Agile. So as I say, this came out decades ago actually from software development, and I've been a software development team lead where my team have been building software applications and services, and we used Agile methodologies. And there are lots of different methodologies out there. If you want to know more about it, there are plenty of videos you can go and watch. What I'm going to talk about in this video is a sort of mix of things that I think work. And for me, one of the great things about Agile is that it's a methodology that enables you to deal with uncertainty and deal with the project in a practical, pragmatic and flexible way. And one of the things that I see people doing a lot is they talk about Agile methodology and they're very rigid about it, which for me goes completely against the Agile methodology in the first place. For me, it's about picking what works and making sure that you deliver what your customer wants. So I'm just going to go through, I suppose, how it's different to Waterfall and 4 or 5 key elements that make up Agile in my mind, the things that are different about it that I think you really need to know. Again, there's loads and loads of detail you can dive into if you wish. You're just not going to get that in this video. Go off and Google it. There'll be loads and loads of sites and loads of videos out there will go into real depth if that's what you're after. And of course you can get Agile trained as well and get certified. So one of the key differences between a waterfall project and an Agile project is that Agile projects tend to have small self-organising teams. And you'll have heard me mention in previous videos about self-organising teams. And as you can imagine, given that they are self-organising, the role for you as a leader is completely different if you're in an Agile project rather than in a waterfall project. In a waterfall project, you're expected to lead everything and keep it all on track. In an Agile project, you're letting your experts just get on with what they're good at. And, you're letting your Scrum Master and your team get on and deliver the project. And we'll come on later on to why I think that's a significant change. The second thing is about the reason that you use Agile is you want to try and get to a better understanding of what the product or service is. And one of the best ways of doing that is by working with a customer and creating a minimum viable product, an MVP, which is, I suppose, the sort of quickest, simplest version of the product or service to test your assumptions and check the understanding of what you're trying to build with a customer. So it's not about setting the requirements, taking 6 months to do that, and then working on delivering it for another 12 months, and then pulling a tea towel off it and showing the customer and going, look, there you go, that's what you asked for, and then going, well, that isn't what I thought I was getting. You show customers as soon as possible what the product or service is, so that you can keep refining it and get it closer and closer to what's actually needed rather than what you all thought was required. And it's about iterating and repeating that process, basically. So creating a product, working with the customer to understand if that's what they actually wanted, and then repeating that, repeating it until the product or service is where you wanted it to be, or the time has run out. Which links me very neatly to the third item, which is traditional waterfall projects tend to be driven by cost. And that isn't to say that cost isn't a factor with Agile projects, because it is with any project. But the difference here is that Agile projects tend to have a time frame in which to deliver them. And you deliver whatever you can deliver in that time frame, and then you stop. You might come back to it at some point, but you basically agree how long is this project going to last, and you break that up into sprints. So typically a sprint is a 2-week window where you agree with the customer what work is going to be delivered in that 2-week window, and basically you deliver it. So instead of having let's think of a project that in a waterfall approach, let's just say it's a 6-month project in a waterfall approach. Might be the first 4 months of that are identifying the requirements. You've got a month of building or creating or delivering the service or product, and then you've got a month of testing to make sure it does what you thought, and then it's over. You would have a plan for that entire period, and you would know, everyone would know what the steps were, what the milestones were at each phase. In an Agile project, you have a 2-week window called a sprint, and you know exactly what you're doing in that 2-week window. And then what you'll do is you'll come back together and have a conversation about what's going to be delivered in the next 2-week window with the customer. So, you've got a very narrow focus, but what it does is it really focuses the mind and effort on delivering the things you say you're going to do in a short period of time. So it increases the pace, it increases the energy, it increases the speed with which things get delivered. And that, linked with a minimum viable product, means that things are delivered much more quickly using a minimum viable product and Agile approach. I suppose one of the reasons for this was IT projects traditionally were, notoriously bad at delivering, and money would just be thrown, good after bad, and it would go on for much longer than it should have done. Agile was one of the sort of antidotes to that. The other thing that is different about an Agile project is that it's about what the customer's priorities are. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. But the other part is really high levels of customer engagement. So typically there's a product owner from the customer side who is an empowered, authorised user to make decisions about what happens in the project. So they don't have to go off and get permission from somebody else to do something. They're part of the project, they're part of the project team, and they work very, very closely with the rest of the project team to deliver it. So there's not sort of them and us, it's one team delivering, and the customer is a part of that team. And in terms of the prioritisation, if we link back to the sprints, I was talking about it a second ago, what happens is the customer determines the things that are important. I mean, in software terms, it's usually functionality, but it could be the same for a physical product, or it could be what elements of a service are important to the customer. So they create something called a backlog, which is a long list of all the items that ideally they would like delivered. And then what happens is the customer sets the priorities for the sprint. So the 2-week window, they say, I would like these things delivered. And the technical people in the team work with them and say, well, look, we think we can do the first 6 on this list. The other 8 we'll do, if we get round to it. So they pick off the first 6 or whatever the number happens to be, and they work through those, and they meet with the customer on a daily basis as part of a daily stand-up. This is Scrum methodology, as part of Agile. Again, there are lots of different Agile methodologies, but the one that I think works really well is getting together on a regular basis, just for 10-15 minutes with the customer, to work through what needs to be done that day, what was cleared the previous day, what blockages have you got, what can people do to unblock those things, and what things have been completed. And the board that you can see, or the coloured post-its that you can see in the background, that's a Kanban board. And really, you just have a series of columns. Usually you have, a to-do column, a started, a finished, and a blockers column. You might have other columns in there as well, but, if you look up Kanban, you'll find all the details, in other people's videos. And all you're doing really is seeing where you are against each of those activities that you agreed to deliver in that 2-week window. And hopefully by the end of that 2 weeks, all of the things that are on the left-hand side, the to-do pile, are all over in the completed pile, but you can see progress on a daily basis, and the customer can see progress. And you can agree when you get to points where things aren't moving on as they should, you can agree whether those things will get deprioritised and something else moves in, or whether somebody else needs to help move that activity on. So it's a really good way of keeping a really keen focus on what's important. So customers set the priorities. So you do your first sprint, you might have decided you're going to have 3 sprints, so you're going to take the project lasts 6 weeks. After the first sprint, you see what's left on the backlog, plus anything that didn't get done. It might be, of course, that there were some gaps, as in there was some extra capacity that the team weren't expecting, and they've taken some extra things off the backlog. So some of the other things have got done earlier than expected. Some might have been put onto the backlog because there were problems with them. But again, what happens then is the customer and the team decide what activity is going to be done in the next 2-week window. And that just gets repeated. When you get to the end of the agreed project time frame, the example I've just given there was 6 weeks, so 3 sprints of 2 weeks, that's when you stop. You don't just keep going and going and going. And because the customer has, or the product owner has, determined what the priorities were, the most important things have got done. And the least important things are still on the backlog. So it's a really good way of focusing on what matters to the customer. What that does do, though, is I've had lots of very confused customers over the years where they say, well, yeah, no, I'm prioritising, but I thought everything was going to get done. Well, it's not going to get done necessarily, because it's more time-bound than than a waterfall methodology. The other thing is, and this is the final point on this slide, it's about pivoting or rapidly adjusting the plan. So it might be that you build something, you build a minimum viable product, and then collectively you realise that that isn't going to work at all. That isn't the thing you thought you wanted. Now, in a waterfall methodology, you're committed. You've just got to keep delivering, which is why it doesn't make a lot of sense. In an agile methodology, you would pivot, you would look at what makes sense. You go, well, look, going in that direction doesn't make sense anymore. Let's go off in this direction. And you agree that with the product owner, and you head down that route because that's the route that now makes more sense. So it's a much more adjustable, much more flexible approach. So finally, I just want to talk about the difference between Agile and Waterfall from a leadership perspective. So for me, the first is that Agile is about much more supportive leadership. So if you can imagine, you've got some self-organising teams. They don't need you there to tell them what to do. What they need is support. And for me, the major difference is that I think in a waterfall approach, it's much more about control and management than it is about leadership. So on the Agile side, it is about helping your experts solve problems and helping them think differently to overcome problems than it is about just controlling them and keeping them on track. I think with the Agile approach, it's about more of an adult-to-adult relationship with your customers. So it's about partnering with your customers. It's about them being part of the team and delivering alongside you. Whereas in the waterfall approach, it's much more about getting what they need and then you deliver to the customer in a more parent-child approach. Agile's about doing the things that matter, including innovating. So given that you only have a certain amount of time, you've really got to focus your efforts on what's going to make a difference. Whereas I think in the waterfall approach, it's much more about delivering to plan, whether that plan makes any sense or not, especially as time's moved on. And I think the other thing about Agile is about leading in uncertainty. You don't know from fortnight to fortnight what activities your team are going to be working on. You know what project they're working on, but you don't specifically know what activity. Whereas, the waterfall plan, also the waterfall approach is about much more managing people to that plan and making sure the milestones have been hit, the reporting's been done, etc. That's it's very clear and linear approach, whereas the Agile, you've got to just tweak and adjust, and it's a much more dynamic, I think a much more interesting environment in which to operate. So as you can see, hopefully see, there are lots and lots of reasons why you need to know about Agile. You need to be able to deliver projects in an Agile way, and you need to be able to lead people who are working in an Agile methodology. I think if you're in the waterfall space, you're much more likely to be a manager than you are a leader, and you're managing the process. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that, I think leadership is the next stage on from that. As I say, this is just an overview of what you need to know to be able to lead. So finally, if you want to know more about Agile, there's lots of great videos out there, lots of sites you can go to. I recommend 2 YouTube videos, Spotify Engineering Culture Part 1 and Part 2, 2 really good videos that just bring to life how to operate in an Agile way. Again, you don't need to know all the detail, but as a leader you need to know how it would work. It's an explainer video, it's one of the best I've seen. Just a really interesting couple of videos. I'll put a link to them in the description. And if you want to know more, as I say, you can go off and get certified, or you can just do a load of training, or watch a load of videos and dig into the Agile Manifesto and things like that. Hopefully that's given you a good overview of why there is a difference between Agile leadership and waterfall leadership, and why Agile is going to be the thing that takes over and why you need to know about it as a modern leader. If you found this video useful, if you could give it a like, that'd be fantastic. If you could subscribe as well, that'd be brilliant. And if you click the notify bell, even better. It costs nothing, but it really, really helps the channel. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, I would very much appreciate it. And there's lots more to look forward to. So, hopefully you haven't got the face of that person, going a bit like this. Hopefully that was an interesting video that helped you to understand what Agile's about, and we'll cover some of the more technical elements, but from a business and leadership perspective in future videos. I shall see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching.